Welcome to Channel 24. Now in the studio with us is a leading expert on the Kremlin strategy and post-Soviet geopolitics. James Nixey is the director of the Russia and Eurasia program at Chatham House in London, where he spends years researching on the Kremlin's strategic ambitions and Russia interactions with its neighbors. Mr. Nixey, welcome to the studio, and it's a pleasure to have you here in Kyiv.
The honor is mine.
So you were here in Ukraine during very unusual moments, and not talking about the Russian war only, but the protest. The protest that's happening right now, do you believe that the public outrage in Ukraine over the weakening NABU and SAPO by Ukrainian government, Ukrainian President Zelensky, somehow could be used by Russia, and if so, in what way?
Yeah, so thank you very much indeed. First of all, let me say I don't consider myself to be an expert on Ukraine compared to you and your country fellows, but first of all, but yes, it is a remarkable time to be here. It is not the first time that the Ukrainian people have saved Ukraine. You know, Ukraine's civil society, its NGOs, its non-governmental the power of its non-governmental third sector organizations and the media have consistently, over the years, course-corrected governments when they have gone wrong. And clearly, this is a bad misstep by the Zelensky government. There's no doubt about that. So, I think it is really quite heartwarming and a remarkable instance that when you have such an obvious misstep that the people come out onto the streets in huge numbers, non-violently, young demographic, and actually manage, it would appear, early days, to U-turn government policy. That's how things should work. Governments should make mistakes. They should be course-corrected. And we'll see if that continues to happen. But you're right. Look, it's been a bad look. It's been a tough few days for Ukraine. I mean, we haven't seen this kind of thing for a long time, not since really 2014 in some ways. This is the worst misstep that the Zelensky government has made. But of course, it's in the context of war now. I mean, it gives grist to the mill of the doubting Thomases in the West, of the Russians. And so, yeah, it has been an unfortunate weakening of the Ukrainian position. But you know what? I think, for what it's worth, it'll blow over. This ought to be just a bad moment in time, and hopefully Ukraine can get back to the most important problem, which is not the corruption. Actually, it is in fact the war and Russia's invasion. Yeah,
and how do you think Russia could use all of it in instability right now?
Well, I mean. Of course, the Russians will use it as some form of justification that Ukraine was a basket case. Ukraine is not worth the effort, particularly with the Americans, when you've got a Trump administration which is not instinctively inclined towards favoring Ukraine and doesn't need much of an excuse to just abandon it completely, despite Putin's betrayal of Trump, if you like, inconsistency with Trump. So I think the Russians will use it with the Americans more. I don't think the Europeans, for what it's worth, will buy into any Russian arguments much. But this particular Trump administration does seem prevalent to Russian disinformation, and so yeah, of course they'll try anything, right?
Yeah, that's the good point. I was thinking how probably Russia could influence the opinion of the United States and Europe about Ukraine. And because, you know, the society has divided right now into those who think that probably Europe will swallow what Ukrainian government do somehow, just because they also feel like Ukraine is protecting Europe. But other part thinking that no one's going to swallow anything, not Brussels, not the Washington, D.C.
Well, Europe shouldn't swallow it, and I don't think it will. I think Europe will ensure that if this bill goes ahead, we'll see, right? Mm-hmm. But if this bill goes ahead, I think that the European Union's the funding and the political support, the rhetorical support towards Ukraine would be physically and diminished, and there would be strict, if you like, conditionality put upon Ukraine that if this is not righted, if this is not corrected, then actually they cannot expect the same level of support. And that is correct, because if you fudge it, if you lessen your standards, then actually it begins to unravel overall. So for what it's worth, I don't think the European Union will take this lying down. And already, as we know, there have been calls between the leading protagonists, and I'm sure that there have been some very harsh words spoken. America is a different story, because it's not exactly on side. We don't know where its true loyalties lie. And so I think that the Americans are much more likely to use this as an excuse not to deliver consequent funding, not least beyond the 10 billion that we've seen agreed in the last few days.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was worried about. Okay, but does from your perspective, Moscow has a concrete plan right now to destabilize Ukraine from within?
Moscow always has a plan to destabilize Ukraine, and it has done for, frankly, at least the last 20 years, if not considerably more. And it will try. It's got a bag of tricks. It's got a playbook, and it goes down the list. It finds out what works, what doesn't work, and it is able to. It's warfare against Ukraine. Of course, it's kinetic. Of course, it's military, and that's the most serious. But it's diplomatic. It's economic. It's cyber. It's informational. And so yeah. I think it. I don't know. You said concrete plan. Whether or not there is, a file somewhere in the corridors of the Kremlin which says. I mean, I don't know. But I think that it's what is certain is that. On the basis that this is an existential matter for Russia, obviously for Ukraine, but for Russia, that if it does not manage to get if it can't possess Ukraine, it will wreck Ukraine. Then it is going down this theoretical list. And so the answer is it absolutely has a plan, and it will stop at nothing to get it.
A few days ago, I had the conversation with a Russian oppositioner, and he said that that's a Putin's war, which I personally, of course, don't believe it. Yeah, I mean, and he was trying to convince me that if Putin will die, Russia will get rid of Putinism. Mm-hmm. What is your perspective on that?
Yeah, I'm with you. I couldn't disagree more. I'm afraid this is a fallacy held by much of the Russian opposition, and we can sympathise with them to an extent, of course. But it's very seductive to think that this is all about one man's, fanatical whim. The truth is, actually, that not only are there various clans and elites around Putin in the circle around him, but also the Russian population itself genuinely believes in Russia's what they would call a specificist, and that it has a right and a destiny to have an empire, and that it must have an empire in order to be Russia. So, and the vast majority of Russians believe this, and that is really what separates the Russians from any of the other states in the former Soviet space. That the Russians believe at all levels that Russia has a God-given right to empire, and that, of course, includes Ukraine above all else.
So no matter who's going to rule in Kremlin,
it's very unlikely. I don't possess the imagination to understand how that any ruler in Russia within the next 50 years, say, could possibly change the systema enough to have a peaceful, democratic, non-violent, non-aggressive Russia, which is at peace with itself and the world, because that's just not the way in which Russia is currently built. Now, look, of course, in the far-flung future, who can say, right? But honestly, beyond in the short to medium term, I see no possibility, regardless of whether Putin is in power or not. Well, obviously not if he's in power, but even if he's not in power, then Russia, unfortunately, is the leopard that won't change its spots. Russia, I'm afraid, needs an enemy, and that is both the West and Ukraine, and it needs, and it's of course it has mobilized its society and its economy onto a war footing. So it needs the war. So it needs a war. It needs the enemy. There's nobody waiting in the wings. There's no party or person waiting in the wings to take over and change this. I accept, of course, as you know, that occasionally Russia has had small periods of thaws, otypils, whereby you've started to Khrushchev or Kerensky and beforehand and that kind of stuff. So, but these are temporary blips on a very autocratic history.
You personally met Putin a long time ago, more than 20 years ago, I guess, from now. So I'm not asking how can you describe him. It's not about that. He's definitely, but could you recall the moment when you met him? Could you recognize the monster inside of him back then?
Yeah. I think it was entirely clear, even though I was much younger, 20 years ago, that he was, there wasn't any humanness inside. He was cold and calculating and intelligent, by the way, and competent, but lacking any compassion or warmth or humanity. And it was, I have to tell you in context, immediately after the Beslan disaster, which of course he blamed not on terrorists, but on the West, actually. And so I don't see that Putin was somehow changed in the Munich speech in 2007, or it was the Georgia War in 2008. To be honest with you, I mean, he is what he was, which is a KGB-trained conservative ultranationalist.
And psychopath.
Yeah, I certainly think he's sociopathic.
Sociopathic, okay. Mm-hmm. Jason, your recent Chatham House report, not your personal, but I was reading that, Russia struggled to modernize its military industry. And that was saying that Russia is now facing serious difficulties in developing genuine new and technologically advanced systems. Yep. Instead, it's relying on Soviet-era design and outdated research. Despite record military spending, the industry is in a state of regression. Can we say Russia has abandoned breakthrough innovation altogether, and it's not only modernizing what remains from the Soviet era?
Yes and no. I mean, of course, Russia doesn't possess the economic capability to be, or the state capacity to be truly technologically innovative. However, it does possess other abilities. First of all, historically, of course, it has been a leading science and technology innovator and inventor, but that's not the real point. I think the truth is that Russia can buy or copy or steal what exists and is being innovated elsewhere. So in terms of AI, yes, of course, Russia is miles behind, but China's not. China's only a fraction behind the US as far as AI is concerned. And we don't yet know the extent of what China is willing to give to Russia. I suspect a lot more than we are willing to publicly admit. So I'm not concerned. So I think that even if Russia isn't capable of developing its science and technology industry to the level that the West is, then I think it is absolutely capable of stealing it. And if you think of the potential of AI, of non-aligned artificial intelligence on large language learning models, to cause damage if you input into the AI, I don't know, shall we say that there is no such thing as, that the world without Russia is not a world worth living in, which was, I think, Putin's quote at one point, then imagine what AI could do with that in, not, of course, next year, but imagine what AI could do with that in 20 years' time. And if you go back to a previous question, that the Russia problem is not going to be solved in 20 years' time, then that does worry me an awful lot.
Yeah, but which systems are completely dead in Russia?
Which, I'm sorry?
Systems like tech, what type of weapon completely dead in Russia?
Well, I don't think Russia possesses the ability to, of course, they as you know, They like to brag and boast about new hypersonic missile systems, but actually they're not as new as they are boasted about, and in fact that uses a great deal of old technology. And of course they do still have, nuclear capability, and we shouldn't. So I think I would argue that they have enough at the end of the day. And of course the nuclear question, I know you haven't asked about it directly, Natalia, but it is unfortunately a trigger word, which triggers a certain sort of self-deterrence in the minds of Western politicians. So Russia doesn't have to be super advanced in mil-tech in order to put the fear of God into Western politicians.
James, at the same time when the Chatham House report was published, The Sun publishing a video, which was, millions of people watched it, where it calls like a drone death factory, and they are producing something like Iranian Shaheds.
They do. They copy Iranian Shaheds.
They're copying. What's your take on that in light of that? I don't know, the future capabilities of Russia attack Ukraine.
Well, that's kind of what I'm saying. I think Russia has an ability to copy, to copy paste, but not to. Rather than to innovate on its own, and but honestly, that is enough. I mean, in the drone war, as you're specifically mentioning it, then it's a question of continual, incremental innovation, and you get a step ahead, and then the other person, the adversary, gets a step ahead, and that is the history of the drone part of this war has been to always try to be, one step or two steps ahead. But you can never be permanently ahead, because somebody will always outmatch you, outthink you in the end for a short while.
Yeah, that's a good point. But why Putin is showing this factory, because definitely it was from his permission to show it to the international media right now, what signals that gives to the world?
I mean, we can only speculate, right? But I think that, I do think that a lot of it is for show. A lot of it is designed to shore up the confidence of his Russian base, of the population base, and of course it's also simultaneously a signal to the West that we are in this for the long run. We're not giving up and going away. We've got capabilities, we've got intent, and I think that there is a significant body of opinion in the West, in all countries, I don't just mean the Hungaries and the Slovakias, whereby semi-influential people in serious decision-making positions do begin to wonder if they are going down a road that is ultimately leading to nuclear war, or if Ukraine is just not as important as going to war with Russia. And my main concern is not really Ukraine, in the sense that I think that Ukraine has the internal resilience to cope. Whether the West, with its more flaccid and lazy attitude towards Russia and international security, has the ability to stay the course, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, that was my next question, because I hate to ask the question how the West should respond when, as you're saying, Russia is giving you that show, giving that signal, hey guys, we're not going to stop, we're going to continue to terrorize Ukrainians, and as they're saying, they're going to hit Ukraine cities with 2,000 drones by November, which is completely insane and shocking news, by the way.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue, there's some specifics, right? I mean, quite clearly we need to create an air bubble with air defense over Kiev, and there are plans to do this, but again, there is still this fear in Western minds that would lead to taking out a Russian jet, which would trigger an escalation of the conflict. Again, we self-deter. But more broadly, that's just an example, then it seems to me that we don't sufficiently respond to each individual Russian attack. We've become inured to it. We accept the fact that Ukrainian cities are bombed on a daily, nightly basis, and rather than actually responding to it. If you take specific examples like the destruction of the Kharkovka Dam, for example, then that ought to have been an incident which provoked a very clear and stated response. But no, we were ummed and erred, and we looked at attribution, and then we finally attributed, and then nothing actually happened. There was no response to that particular event. So we are effectively encouraging Russia to attack Ukraine by our inability to respond ourselves, because we don't want to get sucked up into it. But the truth is, Natalia, we're already sucked into it. We are at war, whether we like it or not, and that's because Russia believes it. And if Russia believes it, then frankly it is true. But we don't want to call it out like that.
Yeah, at one of the conference, Ukrainian soldiers said that the action of European leaders reminds him somehow when you waking up your kid to school, and the kid is waking up and saying to his mom, I need 5 more minutes. I need 5 more minutes. That's what we see in Paris, in London, in Brussels. I don't want to underestimate what this government are doing for Ukraine, for us. But at the same time, it always feels not enough.
Look, and it probably always will. I mean, that's kind of, in a wartime situation, I don't see how it could ever feel enough. For what it's worth, I think the Ukrainians, the issues about the corruption issues we've been speaking about to one side, I think the Ukrainians are doing all that they possibly can in terms of holding the front line and holding the Russians back, and it's an extraordinary achievement. I mean, what was it going to be? 3 days? The Russians were going to take Kiev in and ultimately Ukraine, and it's been more than 3 years. And I think that nobody expected that of Ukraine. So, bearing in mind the fact that this is a David and Goliath situation, numerically and size-wise, I think most people in the West probably do believe that Ukraine's ability to resist and to hold that line is extraordinary. But the more important point is has the West done enough? And the answer is quite clearly no. It's still got stockpiles of weapons. It's still got capability. It's still got holding Russian assets. It's still, and of course there are lots of equities on their plate. They've got other things to deal with domestically, internationally, and we can accept that. That's fine. But at the end of the day, particularly as far as Europe is concerned, it is the number one security problem for Europe, not just for Ukraine, but for Europe. And therefore, I don't think that they have got any excuse not to have done more than they have. And they will tell you how much they've done. They will tell you how supportive they are. But the reality is they've fed Ukraine enough to survive, but not to win.
Yeah, you said that quote probably a year ago. I've heard it from them, the interviews. And yeah, from the numbers of weapons the West is giving to Ukraine right now. I remember you said that particular quote around a year ago. And with a given weapon to Ukraine right now from the West, do you think we're at what stage we are just not to, let Russia win, or not to let them seize Ukraine, or something much more worth?
Well, the battlefield situation right now is, I wouldn't describe it as a stalemate. That's not correct, because a stalemate means nobody can win in chess. But it's simply not aligned with the political imperative for a deal. So you can go to Istanbul and you can agree on prisoner swaps, but not literally nothing else, because the two sides simply neither side has achieved enough. Russia hasn't got all of Ukraine. Ukraine's still not whole. So there is no incentive for Russia or Ukraine. Ukraine couldn't tolerate it politically or popularly, and actually that's probably true for Russia as well. So I think where we are is, quite honestly, and I'm sorry to be so pessimistic about this, but we're right in the middle of this. I mean, I don't know how long it's going to last any more than anybody else. But we're not at the beginning, we're not at the end, and both sides have still got economic, military capabilities to spare. They've got more to throw at this war, I'm sorry to say, in the case of Russia. So I don't see it ending anytime soon. I don't see the Ukrainians crumbling. I don't see Russia crumbling either, I'm afraid. But again, that is because we haven't sufficiently lowered the price of oil. We haven't put pressure on elsewhere, and that is not an impossible job. Russia is not 12 foot tall. It's a serious military power. It's got economic capabilities, but it's not invulnerable. It's just that we think of it as such, and so a combination of the fear of a Ukrainian victory. I mean that, a fear of a Ukrainian victory, a fear of a Russian loss. I mean that has really infected the thinking inside Western militaries.
And then what? Nuclear weapon?
And then something akin to anarchy in Russia, a chain reaction implosion up the line, anarchy in Russia, uncontrolled nuclear weapons. The West has historically and currently been much happier with stability than with change. We'd rather see a dictator in place, from Nazarbayev to Lukashenko, and stable, than the fear of what might come next. It's been a serious policy inhibitor.
I know that thanks to Western support, Western weapons were still standing. But what would Russia do without China, India, Iran?
It's a good question as to the extent to which North Korea and Iran and China have been a game changer for Russia. Have they kept Russia in the war? I don't know. I think that obviously they've gone to these countries in desperation. They've not been able to do it themselves. I mean, Russia has certain limitations. So it has certainly been useful. I mean, if you take the North Korean soldiers, for example, if nothing else, they have managed to free up Russian capabilities elsewhere. So, and China, as I say, I think has probably given more than Western politicians would like to admit. We're sort of in denial about the extent of Chinese assistance to Russia. And obviously, as far as Iran is concerned, then because that is the other major issue in the world right now, then I think that has sort of distracted Western attention there. And I don't think Iran's assistance on its own is particularly consequential. But cumulatively, together, I think that we shouldn't forget that Russia has allies in the global south, in other dictatorships. These countries don't have anything in common. There's no union with them particularly, not even BRICS or anything ridiculous like that. But actually, they do have common cause, which is a certain bizarre respect for Russia, what it's achieved, by which I mean in terms of its standing up to America. They have anti-Americanism. So they have this common cause. We shouldn't underestimate Russia's abilities diplomatically, its persuasive abilities to get these countries on side. It shouldn't be us. We thought in the initial days of the war that it was the world against Russia. That's not, unfortunately, true. I'm afraid Russia has a great deal of support from the countries whose regimes that it props up in Africa, in Latin America, as well as the ones that you've already mentioned. Russia, I think, will continue to get that kind of support. We have to accept that is a factor, that is part of a war, and it is a little bit worrying because I think China does not want Russia to lose this war. And
why?
Because
to weaken the Russia and to have more influence, or something else?
I think it was, again, yes, all of these factors. Obviously, it would really make them think twice about any takeover of Taiwan. But more than that, I think that it's just not in Chinese interests to have a victorious West, which has shown that liberal democratic values and Western military might can beat the Russian machine. That is not the outcome that China desires. China's not as much of a pyromaniac as Russia is. China is more diplomatically capable, But if you were to ask them, what is the extent to which is China on side? I know China's interests and Russia's interests are not fully aligned. China wants to just to prosper in the world system. Russia wants to bring the world system down. But I think, Putin and Xi have a very close relationship. We know this, and it is. China. Look, it probably was surprised by the war. It didn't necessarily want that upheaval in international relations, but I think now that they're in it, they want Russia to win it. Or at the very least, there to be no satisfactory Western victory. And at the end of the day, of course, they care nothing for Ukraine, right? I mean, it is an irrelevance to them. It's as much of a non-country to them as it is to Russia. It doesn't matter. It doesn't count. And so, yeah, I know some people think we should try to split China off from Russia. I just don't see that as being a likely winning course of action, I'm afraid to say.
Yeah. It's the same that we will never change our neighbor, Russia.
Absolutely. And therefore, you'll never change your neighbor, but the only way in which you can really coexist peacefully, is with a different Russia. We've already spoken about the fact how very unlikely that is. So I'm sorry to say that Ukraine is going to live with insecurity for even longer than the war, because even the victorious Ukraine will leave a resentful Russia. Yeah, and that's better than a Russia we're at war with.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid that there will be no security until Russia is a liberal democratic country, and that looks like a fantasy.
But how other countries that are living safe bordering with Russia? I'm not talking Belarus.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I understand. Although you're not wrong. You never know. Belarus has had its attempt at revolution. It didn't work out. The people weren't strong enough, and that's it. But
unfortunately, yes.
But you're right. And so I think other countries are at risk as well. Russia wants an empire. It doesn't solely include Ukraine, but Ukraine is, if you like, the first among those equals. And Ukraine is historically, albeit pseudo-historically important to Russia. I think Putin prizes Ukraine amongst all else. It's not as if Kyrgyzstan matters that much. Belarus matters, Georgia to an extent, Armenia. There's a sort of a concentric circles, but I'm afraid that Ukraine, and then Moldova afterwards, I guess, as being the most likely candidate for EU entry, is the primary target. But yeah, of course, northern Kazakhstan isn't entirely safe. That's true, but it's not in the immediate sites.
I just want to get back to the question about the weapon producing. I don't know whether it's the same factory or no, but I saw a very strong investigation of a Russian opposition journalist that that published the news that in Tatarstan they are also have a huge factory that are producing drones, but I don't think that's the same one. No. Next to the university, and they are using, maybe you've heard about that, they're using 15, 16, 17 years old students to produce drones. And by the way, they are using data apps like Tinder just to get African girls to go to the university, and they end up at this factory. That was a huge investigation, also just during these days published, like 1 week ago.
I haven't maybe read the same story as you, but I completely concur that in fact Russia is using teenagers who are into gaming to adapt that skill towards drone technology. And so, yeah, they were very. It is absolutely an established, verified fact that Russia is not just has mobilized all levels of society, from the elderly veterans to the teenagers, in order for this one most important existential for Russia, as they see it, cause. So, I mean, I don't know your specific story about Kazan, I presume, but I absolutely know that in their desperation to match and outgun and outmaneuver the Ukrainians, that the Russians are also that's what I'm trying to say. They're adapting, they're innovating themselves. Maybe not technologically, but they are able to. We shouldn't mistake a rubbish plan for a rubbish army. Of course, they got it wrong at the start. They underestimated Ukraine, but actually, the history of Russian military warfare is that they are able to adapt to changing deleterious situations, and that is one example. But I suspect there are numerous others, and so I think it doesn't pay to underestimate the adversary. And I think there is a temptation. I don't think the Ukrainians particularly underestimate Russia. Russia is probably not anyway. But certainly I think there is a...
We were in 2022 somehow.
Perhaps.
Probably that was psychologically helping us to, but then realize that it's not going to lead us anywhere.
Fair enough.
Yeah. But, I mean, how do the world should react on that Russia using students, basically kids, to this genocide against Ukrainians?
Well, honestly, I mean, we know that the Russians are quite happy to send their young men, it is men, to the meat grinder and thousands are killed a day. They don't care. Human life is not a precious commodity in Russia. They don't care for the life. This is what separates out the Russians, I think, from many other nations on the planet, not all, where they don't place any value in the lives of their citizens. And that is, they are. It's a production factory. Russia actually has a declining demography, not just because of war, but for all sorts of health-related reasons. And they do understand that they need to increase their demographic. Their working-age population is declining, and that is going to be an increasing problem for them. But that's only a slow problem, of course. It's not a problem that is a problem today. It's a problem for 30 years' time, and the extent to which they think that far ahead, not really. I think, look, we know that they brainwash their students. We know that they, from a very young age, much younger than teenagers.
No, they brainwash the kids from the first grade,
exactly.
like 6 years old, 7 years old, of course.
Yeah. So it's hardly a surprise that they utilize, and we know that they're sending them into battle from young ages. We know they'll exploit their prison population and all of that kind of stuff. So it's hardly a surprise that they're using them to adapt, fly, and program drones. So again, I don't think we should. There's not. If you're asking how low will they go, I mean, there's not really a bottom of a barrel situation here. They're a little desperate. They will try, and they will try stuff. Not everything will work. If something doesn't work, they'll try something else. Of course, they have to be kept out. We should just caveat it by saying, I think obviously the war. I wouldn't like to say the war is popular in Russia. That's not quite accurate. The truth is that most Russians, now that they're in the war, think they must win the war. And so I think the Russian government is sensitive to what it can and can't get away with, but it can get away with an awful lot. Increased mobilization in Russia will lead to certain political problems, and they don't want that to snowball. It's happened in the past. It could happen again. So, they have to play it quite carefully, but at the same time, not so much that they can't do more. We know that Russia can mobilize more. They can get more people from Central Asian republics. They can get more people from further abroad, from further afield, which is why I think that Russia is still militarily, economically, and as we've discussed, technologically capable, I'm sorry to say, for the foreseeable future, which is exactly why we have to redouble our efforts in the West to ensure that that can be countered and neutered and ultimately defeated.
James, thank you so much for your time. And I have so much questions left, and I hope that next time we will talk about the Russian assets, because I would love
didn't
to.
get that, did we?
I would love to talk about that topic, probably online if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
Yeah. Thank you so much.